This is The Comms Exchange, a podcast by 3090 Marketing. Each episode, we sit down with colleagues, leaders, and changemakers to share stories and lessons from the field of community and economic development. Together, we explore how communications shapes strategy, builds trust, and drives momentum, because every project, every partnership, every breakthrough begins the same way, with a conversation. Hello and welcome to the Comms Exchange, where we explore the people and ideas that shape how we build, connect, and communicate. I'm Rachel Ledet.
And I'm Christianne Brunini. Today we're joined by someone who has helped shape the built environment of South Louisiana for decades. Steve Rome is a partner at VergesRome Architects and a leader whose work sits at the intersection of design, community, and long-term resilience. His team has been trusted across the Gulf Coast for projects that balance practicality with innovation, especially in places where the environment demands that buildings do more than just stand up.
One of Steve's most recent projects is Les Maisons de Bayou Lafourche, a $9.5 million affordable housing development in Lockport, Louisiana. And it quickly became a target of an incoming hurricane that damaged much of the area in South Louisiana, and that was Hurricane Ida. While the surrounding neighborhood suffered catastrophic damages, this community stood strong and was able to be put back into use almost immediately. It is a project that represents not only technical excellence, but also what it means to design with empathy, equity, foresight.
Steve, we're excited to have you here today to talk about what true resilience looks like, how culture and design inform one another, and what the future holds for building stronger communities across the Gulf Coast. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Les Maisons de Bayou Lafourche became a world case study in resilience when it stood strong through Hurricane Ida, while the surrounding neighborhoods suffered catastrophic damage. When you designed this development, what were the key decisions technically and philosophically that allowed it to perform the way it did?
Well, first of all, we had to make a commitment. We partnered with a developer here in New Orleans, Gulf Coast Housing Corporation. They also invited us to participate in an RFQ, whereas there were mandates for specific design guidelines for housing resiliency. And three components were fortified, enterprise green, and Energy Star. We made a commitment, kind of put our neck on the line so we would win this project, agreed to fulfill all the requirements necessary to achieve all these certifications, which put us at risk because if we didn't achieve these qualifications and credentials, the project wouldn't be financed. So we really worked very hard with the developer in the RFQ, making the commitments and making sure that we understood what it took to get this project and win it and bring it to success. What made it is really learning about, we had a learning curve on all these, with these processes with Fortified. And today you're hearing all about fortified roofs and so forth. And I'd like to comment about that a little bit later. But this was a very, very, very stringent process that had to be documented continuously. Needless to say, I should have said beforehand, when we were awarded the job, we were very, very excited about it, yet we were a little terrified, making sure that we meet and exceed the owner's expectations or the developer's expectations. And so we did. So it's just not about fortified and achieving a certain certification. It's also about, what do we do, in our design documents efficiently, economically, let's say technically, to succeed. The thing about this here, what made this project kind of notable nationally, was that all of these certifications were just certifications. There wasn't, okay, we're doing this, let's see what happens. And like you said, this property sustained after Hurricane Ida. We were about 95% complete, and Ida hit 150 mile an hour winds. And like Grant Etheridge would say, the contractor, on the chin. And when he went out the next day, he was just totally surprised. There was really no destruction, and everything around it was just devastating. So there was a lot to it, and there were a lot of key decisions we had to make along the way because we did have a budget.
Well, and certainly any project, whether they are using private funds or public funds, there's always a budget in mind. And as the architectural group, you're having to work with construction estimators to make sure that you're hitting budget, but also designing in the way that, especially in Louisiana, that wind speeds are not going to demolish the building. And so there's, I'm assuming, kind of a lot of back and forth that you are working through as you design to make sure that it's functional, but also aesthetically what your client is looking for. And then there's this like price component. Can you talk a little bit about when you're putting that into practice to do something that will be storm resilient? And what are some of the things maybe that you had to think through, or any sort of processes that you had to just get your team on board with as you're building something that's going to be Gulf Coast resilient with our water issues and our wind issues?
First thing we do is, the owners, the developer, decided on the property, which was in the middle of a cane field. And when we saw the property, we went, oh my goodness, this is a weird shape. And it was almost like an elongated teardrop. So master planning plays a big component. To make the project feasible, you had to achieve a certain amount of units. And, this was over 30 units, I think 36 units that we got on this development property right in the middle of a cane field. So that was the first thing we had to do was, have enough housing on the property to make it financially feasible for the long term. Secondly, looking at the vernacular style of architecture, of course, Southern Louisiana has its own charm. So what did we do? We presented ways and how it presented sort of a Creole or Cajun cottage, but very, very vernacular of the Gulf Coast. And of course, the little surrounding neighborhoods that were on roadways nearby. So the process here was an incredible collaboration between VergesRome and Gulf Coast Housing Corporation. It was really, really intense in terms of tracking design, tracking costs, and tracking the certifications that are required and how it affects cost. So, working with them, and even in aesthetics, we had to make sacrifices, but there were certain requirements that were needed, and that is the use of materials and the type of materials that we use. Missile impact windows. Of course, we wanted to use standing seam metal roof, but you have to go through the quality control and documentation on how the building is structured from the foundation all the way to the tip of the roof. So going back and forth on all those components at the same time, how are we achieving sustainability, not LEED, but enterprise green and Energy Star? The mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and the infrastructure was also very important. So all through this process of schematic design, design development, and all the way through construction documents, we were closely looking at every nickel that was being spent on the project. That had to be done. And I'll talk a little bit about what were the outcoming results.
So I had some personal experience with this project. So my husband is in affordable housing insurance. And so this was one of his projects. So as we watched the hurricane swirling overhead, wondering how was this going to fare and what does that mean long-term and scalability, and what this says about how we can look at these standards and how they can impact that bottom line, because these projects have such slim margins. How do you see this scaling with these outcomes? Because honestly, I believe the only impact was I think the back came off of a couple of air conditioners, and that was it as far as I recall. So
it was
pretty
minimum damage. I mean, a couple of light fixtures on the back.
Yeah.
It was under $4,000, and a lot of it was cleanup, actually.
Crazy.
In which, the contractor was just totally elated or, overly emotional because he just couldn't believe it. And, the big part of this here is how this building is put together and quality control and making sure that your documents are very clear what needs to be there. And one thing that Grant mentioned to me when he saw the devastation, Grant is the contractor, and I asked him to write a quote, which he did. He just knew that the project was going to be destroyed but it wasn't. He went up there and he said it was very, very emotional, and he was complimenting us. And I said, look, I'm really sorry that we were a pain in the butt. I said, I'm really sorry that we were very hard on you. And he goes, actually, you were a pain in the butt. So, it's how these buildings are put together. It's just not a certification, but there's different ranges of certifications that you can achieve. And unbeknown to us, they wanted fortified gold, but there was more. I learned so much from this, how the walls are put together. How do we tie into the foundations? How do we tie into the roofing? It's not just hurricane clips. It's everything that goes in. The most important part is how the decking of the roof is put together to avoid uplift. And we had to go back and forth a number of times to make sure that, the way they were installing the decking was done to perfection. Now, needless to say, we weren't very popular at the time. But I think when it's all done and said, Grant gave me the biggest compliment ever, you're a royal pain in the ass. And that's what makes it. And about the way of the future, to be honest with you, I knew that we went out there and the building survived the test of time. But I didn't realize this to another gentleman who recommended us to speak at the convention, had recommended us because Les Maisons de Bayou Lafourche became the poster child nationally. Because people were just going after these certifications to get the certifications. Is there really a reason behind this? And this project proved there is a reason. So hopefully that the community of architects, designers, and contractors don't just say, well, we have fortified. You don't hear much about Enterprise Green or Energy Star, but talking about fortified roofs, and I'm almost willing to look at it just to see how far are they really doing it to the extent that we did to make it work. And of course, we got fortified gold. So, it's how that building is put together, like I said, from the foundation to the tip of the roof. And it should be a standard. It should be. FEMA's not going to be here forever. Insurance companies are not going to always back you up. So, your out-of-pocket expenses can be truly minimal. And here you had $9 million project, less than $4,000 worth of damage on that acreage. So that becomes a no-brainer.
It's astonishing.
So, Steve, you were asked to speak at the AIA convention on resiliency and able to use this project as a case study and really show a video of what was happening, the storm coming in, sort of the after effects in the community, and then this little pack of houses that were still standing there, which was a really impactful demonstration of how you were able to communicate that to the audience. And certainly in working with you on that presentation, there was a lot of emotional integrity that was part of the outcome, not just that the technicality was right. I mean, certainly your heart is in this work, and I know that you're very proud of your relationship working with the contractor and what you were able to accomplish. I was also able to meet Grant a few weeks ago, which was a really cool experience because I knew so much about your project and got to talk with him about it as well. So that's just kind of a full circle moment for me to be able to kind of know your side of it and then meet him. And certainly he's proud of it as well. And I hope he listens to this podcast. So we'll definitely tag him on that. I did want to just mention Fortified Gold because it's not just this badge of honor or some sticker that you put on a plaque on your office walls, but that there is an added layer of safety, efficiency, resiliency. And I just wanted to see if you wanted to expound on that any more about the Fortified Gold program and what it meant to have a project that was able to reach that.
Well, nice things, we had a number of units out there. So the first unit sort of became the milestone, let's say the quality control precedent for the rest of the development. So as Grant was able to, pour foundations, build the stud walls, start getting the roofing, everything, the system by which to construct these became a little easier and a lot quicker. So we did take our time on the first one to set it as the quality control standard for the rest of the project, but we still had to document each and every building completely. It was very interesting how we, Margan was really working, my assistant at the time, very hard in communication with Fortified and Enterprise Green. And we also had another consultant that assisted us with Energy Star. on the energy efficiency of equipment and so forth in its installation. But, it was how we communicated with these certification companies and making sure step by step and photographs were uploaded consistently all the way through. And we were totally shocked how we blew the Fortified Gold out of the water. At the time, it was just a certification. Okay, we did it. We abided by the RFQ. Yay, we did it. The owner's happy. It's going to be funded. But the true test was Ida hitting it immediately when it was almost finished. That was just like, whoa. So, to us, it would have just been just a normal project. But the fact that it sustained it for what it was supposed to do, it did what it was supposed to do. It really reconfirmed that this process should be a standard by all architects. It was really interesting during the presentations that we gave. Art, Charlotte, and I had 3 completely different presentations, and there's a lot that goes with it, especially when you hit enterprise green, about sense of community and also sustainability. So that all played in a role parallel to Fortify the Energy Star. So again, before it was just a certification. Now it's a necessity. It really is. And so we hope to have opportunities to do more housing because I think we've got the learning curve. But true test too, you can make it architecturally aesthetic. These interviews I had recently, somebody talking about a building that they did down in South Louisiana. He goes, oh man, it's like a jail, little bitty windows like that, but nothing's going to blow it down. It may not win any awards, but you know what? It's not going to blow down. And I almost said, I have something aesthetically pleasing, constructed out of wood and sustained. So it doesn't have to look like a fort. You can certainly, and if you, ever take a look at Les Maisons, it fits Louisiana, vernacular. And again, the front porch, that is something culturally, important, not just, a 3-foot porch, something that you can really sit on and enjoy and somebody could pass in front of you without hitting the railing. So, all those little things in the positioning of the master plan, how we position these cottages were all important to, really to increase socializing amongst the neighbors. Now, one thing I didn't mention here, the buildings were not occupied at the time. They were just about a month away from residents coming. Had there been residents there, they could have kept on living. We had hookups for generators to hook up in the back, a temporary generator. So that way, the switch gear, the switch on the main panel would switch to the generator and you would have power and air conditioning. So, the residents and the occupants could have continued to live on there within hours after the storm. And that's the way you want it. You don't want to be uprooted. And that's something Charla mentioned. What happens when storms of devastations come through, communities are uprooted, jobs are lost, and what happens? People have to move. So your community that had been together for 20, 30, 40 years, now all of a sudden dissipates and goes away. And that takes years to rebuild. So if we could continue to build this way, in any way that we can, not only sustainably, but, structurally and technically, I think that we can eventually defeat some of these storms. Not tornadoes, but at least the worst of some of these storms that come through South Louisiana.
Okay, Steve. So we love that you've painted a broad stroke over the importance of designing with the end in mind and with long-term community in mind. We would love to be able to add this case study for viewers to be able to go and look at in some of the writing that you and I have done together. I want to put that on our list of being able to share this on the VergesRome.com blog where our viewers can go learn more about your firm if they're interested. We appreciate your just guidance and openness about sharing this project, and it is certainly one that anyone in housing needs to go look at. We would love to spend a few minutes with you doing one of our favorite portions of our podcast, which is our rapid fire quick response Q&A with you, just to pick your brain a little bit more. So I'm going to ask this first question, which will be, I think, very easy for you, but we know you are an avid reader and have a very well-established library. What is something that you have read recently that we should go pick up?
Ooh. And I also like to share readings with my staff. One book I recently read is No Compromise. That's a biography about Florence Knoll that I liked a lot. And I just recently, we had a little get together, social, with some of the staff members. Everybody's welcome in the staff, get cocktails after work. It's nice to really talk about some of the things that I'm reading and getting them encouraged to start reading. So that's one that I love, No Compromise, by about Florence Knoll. The other one I also just recently read was written by Moshe Safdie about his life. You know, growing up Muslim and his architectural background, his studies. He's growing up in Israel. And of course, he's one of the most fascinating designers today. But his life, I don't know how he did it. I just don't know how he did it. But I'm really fascinated with that book a lot. There's one book that I always share with everybody that I've probably
Okay.
read 3 or 4 times. It's fiction, but kind of interjected with, history. There's probably many volumes of it, and it's called the Kingsbridge Trilogy or whatever by Ken Follett. But many years ago, one of my colleagues gave me a paperback of Pillars of the Earth, and I've read it 4 times. But there's also a sequel, and behind it, then the last time he wrote, he did the prequel to it. So you should read it in that order, and I just find it fascinating on any book by Ken Follett, and that are very, very fascinating. So I love those kind of books.
Well, maybe you could tell us, for all the young designers out there who might be listening and thinking about getting into the field of architecture or design, what would be one piece of advice that you would give them?
Well, if you have people that are encouraged or thinking about, like we have often a lot of students that are juniors and seniors high school. First of all, if you're interested in architecture, interior design, find a firm that someone will allow you, you can be their shadow for the day. And I think that a lot of times it's a decision maker. Yes, I love it. I want to do it. But they get to see the other side of the design meetings that are not so much fun, but that goes, we're problem solvers. And so we're technicians and we're designers, but at the same time, we're not perfect. So it's, any student that's interesting, in high school, they should shadow an architect or an interior designer for a few days. The second part of the question, what is it I would recommend to other architects?
What's one piece of advice you would share? What would you give would you give yourself as a younger designer?
Well, I would try to encourage as much travel as possible. I know it's not cheap, but, there's ways that you can always, figure out a way to travel and visit notable work. What makes a lot of these cities throughout the world popular is architecture and interior design. When you visit anywhere in Italy or Paris, they're all distinct, styles of architecture. And you could do the same thing here in the United States, get in the car and just go. I highly recommend a lot of travel and reading. You can never read enough. And I just find reading inspires your creativity, and it's very important to keep that alive. So you can balance it between, I balance it between architecture books, novels, autobiographies, and biographies. There is another one that I like for people to read. It's about Louis Kahn. What do you say, Brick? And I think that's the title of it. And I studied Louis Kahn, in school, and knew a little bit about him. But after I saw a film documentary done by his son for many, many, many months and years, I couldn't get it out of my mind. So I watched it time and time again. When you look at these biographies or autobiographies and you begin to read them or documentaries, you're going to find somewhere where you connect, and you take that connection and you expand on it. And so, good and bad. So I think that you need to continue to explore architects, what they've done. It's not by means of copycatting, but just to see if you have something in common that you can strengthen.
It's a great answer.
And this whole podcast is about making those connections between people and ideas throughout the whole sphere of economic development. But this has been fascinating to pull it all together from an architect's perspective. That's our first time for us. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom.
Awesome. I hope to be invited again. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Steve. I know I will be seeing you soon, and we appreciate you taking the
Absolutely.
time. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today and share a little bit about this project that is not only wonderful, but special to you. And we know that in your work and in your firm's work, there's a lot of heart and soul that goes into buildings that you build, and that is certainly part of the conversation. So thank you for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to The Comms Exchange, a podcast by 3090 Marketing. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss out on an exciting new episode. We'll be back soon with more stories and strategies from the field, because every breakthrough begins with a conversation.